ethnographer a starting place for assessing the shared meaning of corporate culture. I love people who talk in metaphors and analogy. Matter of fact, Dr. Walker has an amazing ability of doing this, I think. And I hope that you guys have had the opportunity to hear his metaphors and his stories and his analogies. But it really makes a hard thing to understand come to life, and it really helps blossom an idea so that you can interpret it how you would like. And what Gertz and Pakanowski are saying is that you should use these metaphors to help people understand what the organizational culture is. Another group of people that I think do a good job with this is pastors or preachers or ministers. When they're giving their sermons, they use the biblical references within stories of metaphors and analogies, such as Jesus himself with parables. And so that helps you see what this is like. I was talking to a professor a while back, and he mentioned that his classroom that term was like a sailboat without wind. And I thought about it, and I knew exactly what he was talking about. He had the sailboat, he had the resources, the students were there, he was there, they were all ready to go. But for some reason, there was just no motivation to get him going. There was no wind to help that sailboat go along. And I knew exactly what he was talking about. And by the use of that metaphor, I had a clear picture of the understanding of what he was talking about. And that's what Gertz and Pakanowski are saying with the use of metaphors. The next quote says that, "Be particularly sensitive to the imaginative language members use, stories they told, and nonverbal rituals and rites that they practice." And the key word here, we've already talked a little bit about how stories and metaphors help, but the reason why I included this is because we need to be sensitive. That's the key word here. If you're an ethnographer, such as Gertz was, and you go into an organization, you have to realize that this culture that's involved with the organization isn't just some surfacey thing that's going on, but it's actually internalized within each of the organizational members. There's a purpose behind what they're doing. There's that tradition that we talked about. There's all these aspects, of very complex aspects, that we might not see. And the worst thing to do is to not be sensitive to that and to offend somebody in some way or another. And our last quote is, "Stories are repeated over and over and provide a convenient window through which to view the corporate webs of significance." And again, we talked about that in one of the purposes of organizational communication, is to learn what is appropriate and what isn't. And not only are metaphors one way to do it, but stories are another way to do it. And what Griffin says here is it's a convenient window through which to view a corporate web of significance. And one thing that I think about is when I, again, was working for Intel, I sat down with my coworker and we were just kind of, shooting the breeze and kind of hanging out. And I remember him saying, "Gall, I heard this story, just to let you know, I don't even know if it's true, but I heard this story that a couple of years ago, this guy named Mark asked for an extra week of vacation. And, I don't know what happened, but I guess the next year when everybody was up for promotion, he wasn't even considered." I don't know if it's true, but, that's just what I've heard. Well, that's how the stories get passed down and passed down. And so clearly to me, I internalized that I am no way going to ask for an extra week of vacation because I want my bonus or I want my salary to go up. And so that's one way that he was sharing the message with me. Instead of saying, "Do not ask for extra vacation," he told it through a story, which made it not so condemning to either of us. So that's what Gertz and Pakanowski say. Let's go ahead and review a little bit through some questions. We've gone over a lot of material, and I really encourage you to read this chapter. It's phenomenal. But let's kind of assess for ourselves when we're looking at this organizational culture. The first question I have posted is, do you think that cultures can be created? We talk a lot about how they're already established when we enter the organization, but say you create an organization, and if the culture is the organization, like Gertz and Pakanowski say, can you then create the culture with the organization? How does that work? Try to figure it out for yourself. The second question is, can cultures be altered? If you come into an organization and you try to change something or alter it, I kept mentioning that you'll be met with some disgruntled people because they won't want it to be changed. But do you think that you can alter organizations? Does it depend on who the people are that are in that organization? Does it depend on the size of the organization? Does it depend on what their mission and goal are? What are the qualities that take an organization so that you can alter it? That's something to kind of think about when you're reflecting on this chapter. And finally, my last question is, what is the connection between culture and interpretation? Or is there not a connection at all? I keep talking about what an ethnographer would assess when they look at a culture, or what you would assess if you entered a culture. But is there no difference between culture and interpretation? Or is your interpretation the culture? I mean, if it's a socially constructed reality, is interpretation and culture the same thing? Kind of think about what you think corporate or social or political or whatever organizational culture is. The last thing I want to leave you with, and I'm not going to go over, we have a video, but I just wanted to show you my last two slides, and they're on the web page. But I just wanted to give this to you more as a reference rather than to study it. We have just gone over what organizational culture generally is, and then we talked about organizational communication as a general, and we looked at the structure of organizational communication. And one thing I think is really important for all of us to do, and this is an aside from what your book says, is that you need to figure out who you are and what you like to do before you enter an organization and converse with them. You don't want to just become the organization. You still want to have that individuality of yourself. And one way that I think that is very important to do this is to figure out what type of structure and what type of culture you like. So that way you can match it with an organization that you decide to be involved in. And one way you can do this is to create your individual mission statement. And if you want to go ahead, and the next slide shows this. And I actually got this from Stephen Covey's book of 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. He talks about individual mission statements, family mission statements, and corporate mission statements. But these are just some basic steps I think are really helpful for you to walk through and see what your mission in life is, and then you can easily match it with an organization's mission. And there's 3 steps on this first slide, and then 2 more. And I'll just let you look at that in the web page and discern if you want to decide to do that. What we're going to do now is watch a video, and I'm really excited about it because I think it pulls everything we've talked in together. What we've talked about is organizational communication. We figured out that it's a human behavior with 2 or more people that are having transactions, whether verbally or non-verbally. We've heard some scholars and their definitions, and they've adhered to what we say. We've talked about the structure of organizations, both informal and formal, and the different types that are involved. We looked at the culture within communications, and we discerned what that culture looks like, and is it the organization as a whole. And all of these things we can put together and look at globally through one organization that I think is phenomenal, and that is the happiest place on earth, Disney World. I love it. And I'm a big Disney World fanatic. I worked for them a couple summers ago. I actually was a lifeguard at Typhoon Lagoon Water Park, and it was a great experience. But I have to tell you that Disney has some ideas that aren't very traditional within other cultures that you might be familiar with. This tape is a little bit older, so you'll notice that some of the prices are a little bit different. You know, I think they say that you can get something for $1, and I don't think that's you can't get in for a cheap price anymore. But Disney has some great ways that they approach their structure, that they approach their culture, all these things. They create this organization to be something a little bit different than what you would see in other organizations. And I think that's what makes them so phenomenal. Before we start the video, I have to tell you a couple funny stories that those of you who have never worked for Disney might not know. In the Disney Magic Kingdom, which is what the video focuses on, the entire Magic Kingdom is actually on the 2nd level of the grounds. There's actually an entire level underneath that is all mazes. and you can get completely lost. And one of the fun things that we would do as employees is we'd walk around the mazes, and you can't even find your way home. There's no signs or anything. You can get completely lost down there.